Um, all right. And everyone can see my screen just fine? Perfect. So here's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. We've got the first 15 minutes to just sort of, since it's been a while since we skipped our February workshop, quickly go over the background of what we're working on, the CPRG grant that DRCOG was awarded, and what the Building Policy Collaborative is. Then I'll go into really the meat of the presentation today to sort of preview for you all of the work that's been going on to pull together the jurisdictional support grant proposal sort of 2.0. There was a 1.1 version that was previewed for you all and discussed back in January. And we're going to be going into some of the details and going through some of the discussion points that the working group has been going through as we've been designing this grant. So really excited for that. We'll then have a little bit of time to have sort of a large format discussion with everyone before we take a little bit of a break. And then we've designed the second half of this agenda really to allow for small breakout discussions. We've got all of our facilitators lined up to really kind of talk a little bit about the formula proposal and the award amounts for jurisdictions, the eligible uses for the grant, and then some of the grant logistics and reporting requirements and things of that nature. After that, we will come back to the full group and we'll have some breakout reporting in discussion, and then we'll talk next steps in terms of this grant development. So if you all don't mind, if looking for some active participation in the chat. So please put your name, community, and role in the chat if you haven't already. Robert and Paul will be helping me monitor that. And if you have any questions or comments as we go through this, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. But today, yeah, we're really going to talk about the initial jurisdictional support program proposal, and we're just going to be gathering some feedbacks as we try to finalize the design of this grant and make it as useful as possible for you all. So quickly, you've probably all heard this before, but I think it's also always helpful to kind of recap. DRCOG was awarded a nearly $200 million grant from the EPA. That's our climate pollution reduction grant. And before I go any further, Robert, can I punt it to you just to quickly talk about it, since it's, I'm sure, top of mind for everyone in terms of the ongoing status of that grant.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Robert Spots, managing the Building Decarbonization Program here at DRCOG. We are still in a position where the funding portal is open to us. We have contact with EPA. We just haven't really received any more guidance. There's obviously parts of our work plans that contradict current executive orders, but for the time being, we're just kind of marching forward with the contract as it's executed, and confident that the money will still be there. The funds have been fully obligated. So it is part of the law right now, and it would take a pretty significant act of Congress or a judicial order to really stop this thing. So happy to field any questions, but we are confidently marching forward here.
Thanks, Robert. So as a reminder, this grant is a 5-year grant period running through October of 2029, funding regional building decarbonization, and was one of 25 projects out of 300 applications that was selected. This is just a brief overview of the overall program structure for the grant. There's 3 services for home and building owners based on need. There's 3 supports to accelerate policy implementation and adoption. And then we've got a program devoted to co-creation of meaningful, equitable, and far-reaching programs. So we'll be talking today about the Building Policy Collaborative. And I just wanted to sort of go into, again, a little bit of why are we doing a Building Policy Collaborative? Well, the problem is that we have really inconsistent patchwork of local building codes, regulations, and processes across the region. Um, and that there's lots of costs and challenges for local governments in adopting and implementing and enforcing new policies and regulations. And, we're navigating, as Robert was talking about a little bit, some uncertainty in the political and regulatory environment as it relates to the policies that we're trying to advance. So the Building Policy Collaborative really is designed to help provide, DRCOG and peer support to local jurisdictions for consistent policy adoption and implementation. And we'll be doing this by providing some additional financial support for participating jurisdictions and also sort of coordinating research to address some of the information gaps out there and misinformation that's getting spread, and you might be seeing in your communities. The real goal of the Building Policy Collaborative is to drive healthy, high performance new construction in existing buildings and to develop collaborative solutions and really support coordinated building policies across the region. With the ultimate goal of lowering energy cost burdens for occupants and transforming the Metro Denver market. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about the jurisdictional support program and the design considerations that have gone into that. And that is really the biggest chunk of what we have allocated to us within the Building Policy Collaborative. So $34.8 million in subawards to our local jurisdictions for staff capacity and other supports. So just a little bit more on the jurisdictional support program. Really, these awards are supposed to enable local governments to implement, enforce, and collaborate on ambitious and consistent building decarbonization policies. Um, and at the outset, this amount would cover roughly $600,000 per jurisdiction over the next 4 years if it was distributed just blanket equally. So you've probably been involved in some of the previous workshops trying to help us figure out how we're going to do this. And there's been 3 held to date. And we'll just kind of quickly go over what some of those conversations were. So back in November when the workshop started, we really were talking about outcomes and barriers. What are the policy outcomes that we want to achieve through the program? What are the challenges we're going to face? What would it take for for your community to overcome those barriers? And sort of what kind of supports could the Building Policy Collaborative provide? And you identified a number of really important policies, including building codes, building performance standards, equipment standards, emission standards, and licensing that you wanted to pursue and explore through the Building Policy Collaborative. And you identified some really key and important roles for the Building Policy Collaborative to play, including, conducting that research and building and demonstrating community alignment, addressing some of those legal concerns together, figuring out ways to provide consistent training, providing that support for local staff to implement these policies and, additional trainings as necessary. We then went into the December 9th workshop where we started to really explore a little bit more about, how would jurisdictions best use the funds that are going towards them? How should we be distributing that funding between our jurisdictions? And sort of what are some of the things that we should be aware of as all grants have administrative overhead and challenges. What would make this worth your time and what wouldn't? So based on that conversation, the working group really developed that proposal 1.1, which was workshopped back in January of this year. And this really identified a couple of different options in terms of how we could, do this distribution, both in terms of, how would we run the grant? Would it be formula funding or competitive? What would be the criteria? And starting to narrow down some of those eligible uses. And we'd asked, a lot of those questions to you and got your feedback on, those eligible uses, the funding allocation, and, the barriers to using this money. And just to reflect back to you again, you all identified some of the top priorities being staff capacity and strategic policy and planning and data tracking and community engagement. And really the top round, the top feedback was to really, narrow in on 2 rounds of funding for this grant, one formula so that we can get the money out to folks as soon as possible, and enable all of our jurisdictions to participate and benefit from this program. And then have a second round where we can, deal with the excess, whatever the leftovers are, and incentivize additional policy implementation and adoption and innovation going forward. So I tried to breeze through that as fast as possible, and amazingly, I think I'm still on time for the agenda because really what we're here to discuss is the Jurisdictional Support Grant Proposal 2.0. So hopefully you all received an email from me that included um, a a draft of that full grant proposal. It's a roughly 13-page document that really tries, is our first crack at detailing out all of the different aspects of the program. What we're going to be going into here and bringing up for discussion are 3 key uh, items. First, we'll be going into the funding allocation. How did we come up with it? What is the formula? Why did we choose this? Or why are we recommending this back to the group? And talking through some of your feedback on that. We'll then be going into some of the narrowing that we've done on the eligible uses, some of the reporting requirements or things that might pop up with regards to that. And then we've also included a timeline for, what we're looking to do in terms of getting this grant going and moving forward. And so those are the 3 things we'll be talking about. But I really encourage you to open up that document on your computer and reference that as we go along. So to start, with regards to the funding allocation, we've had a lot of good conversations with the working group, and really did decide to pursue and explore further the sort of 2 rounds of running this grant. The first one hoping to open this summer, and then running the second round of this grant in 2026. So the recommendation here is to try to front load our first round as much as possible, such that if every jurisdiction took the maximum amount it is eligible to be awarded for, we would be spending down the vast majority of this or obligating the vast majority of this money to the tune of $34.2 million. So what we did in developing this formula was to go through and um, create a formula that uh, had represented a number of different weights based on the feedback that you gave us in terms of, how should we align the award amounts to jurisdictions reflective on the goals of the grant that we received. And so in your in the companion document, you'll see that the formula that we've created um, has 8 tiers of awards, ranging from roughly $50,000 to 2 million, and all jurisdictions will fall somewhere in that range. Um, we scored all of the jurisdictions based on population, current population, and current jobs to reflect sort of the existing residential stock and existing commercial stock of buildings in all of our local jurisdictions, as well as then projected population growth um, by 2050, as well as job growth, again, to account for those 2 metrics. We did know, and I do want to acknowledge that there were a number of formulas and criteria that were recommended or suggested as we, during the last workshop including trying to account for um, greenhouse gas emissions that occur within jurisdictional bounds, environmental justice scores, as well as things like existing code adoption. Um, and there really was a number of scenarios, a great deal of work that went into running a number of scenarios trying to include those metrics. Um, there were a lot of challenges with regards to those as well, and happy to answer any questions that come up going forward. But ultimately, we had a number of challenges around the right data sources and metrics for greenhouse gas emissions, um, as well as some of the sort of jurisdictional bounds problems where sort of the metrics that we had and the data that we have doesn't neatly match up with our political boundaries, and that sort of creates some conflating data points as it relates to, for example, the environmental justice score in Lakeside, really pulling from some of those neighboring jurisdictions. Similarly, a problem with the existing, trying to incentivize or give scores based on existing code adoption is that it ultimately turned into a dollar value amount benefit for not having not having an up-to-date building code. Um, and so it was really subsidizing in a lot of ways, where you were at within your code adoption cycle. All right, so let's move forward. Um, so the funding allocation formula, as I said, is $50,000 to 2 million, and the score is calculated to reflect each jurisdiction score is calculated as follows. So you're reflecting the weights that I previewed earlier. So 30 times a community's percentage of the total DRCOG population in 2025, 45 times the percentage of DRCOG's total jobs in 2025, 10 times the community's percentage of projected population in 2050, and 15% um, projected against the future jobs. Um, the next thing that we then did is to set the award structure and the award tiers, and we had two sort of broad guiding principles that were um, guiding us as we did this. One was to make sure that communities and community awards were bunched into categories that were pretty similar and reflective of each other. Um, you know, to make sure that there was no community that was right at the threshold of going up to the next award tier. So trying to make sure that we were being equitable in that manner. And then also trying to create the award amounts, um, utilize award amounts that would be functionally usable by jurisdictions for the purposes of this grant. Um, and so that's why we have the tiers at $50,000, $100,000, 300,000, 600, 900, 1.2, 1.5, and 2. Really trying to make it possible for as many jurisdictions as possible, as reasonable per the scoring, to bring on one full-time staff over the next 4 years, or to combine their awards with other jurisdictions to sort of be able to access that staff capacity. So just for an example, it was too much to include everyone's awards here, but this is sort of how the scoring works, and some of the different scoring award tiers that different jurisdictions would fall into. Um, so you'll see at the top, Federal Heights, um, is getting, a different value based on its current population, its current jobs, as well as what its expected future population growth and future job growth are. That equals its total score of 19, which puts it in the tier for a maximum award of about $100,000. At the bottom you'll see Parker, which has more significant, is both bigger, but has also more significant growth projections. Those totals totaling up to 200, putting it into the $900,000 award tier. And we can answer questions as it relates to the breakdown between this, but I wanted to show you all essentially, oops, excuse me, the some of the bunching that happened in terms of the differentiation between which jurisdictions would fall within which tier and how much money that would grant them. And so there are some jurisdictions that are scoring higher due to their, existing conditions, and there are some jurisdictions that are scoring higher due to their projected future growth. So um, the goal is then after we've figured out who all is electing into, um, you know, signing up and joining and applying for the first round of grant funds, to then run a second round in the spring of 2026. This round will consist of a competitive grant process to try to award any remaining unallocated funds, as well as to allow any jurisdictions that didn't come in that first round to a second, chance to apply for their award. We're still defining the criteria, but we will definitely, include some criteria um, to incentivize that new participation for those jurisdictions that weren't able to join in round one. All right. Um, Quickly then, I also wanted to go into some of the updates on eligible uses. So we've defined further broadly how the staff capacity, what staff capacity means, and what how jurisdictions can utilize that money. Um, and have included an example budget of what that might mean uh, for um, for localities. And this will all be included in the um, grant package to help support jurisdictions as they go about developing their applications. The second use that we've been sort of narrowing in on is the training and certification. Um, I think the big point here to emphasize is that we are still in the process of sort of coordinating both internally within the DRCOG CPRG grant in terms of what training which funding streams will be available to fund different trainings. Um, so for example, making sure that we're not overlapping with trainings that'll be put on by the workforce grant aspect of this program. We've also gone into eligible uses on permitting and system support. Um, I think this one's probably pretty clear. No notes there, but wanted to make sure folks see that. Um, as well as trying to narrow down the technical assistance options. Again, here, trying the warning or forewarning is that we're trying not to double dip. So we know that there's TA available through CEO funding sources, and we don't want to we don't want to be double funding that, um, and want to make folks aware that there are some additional reporting requirements um, that may pop up depending on the type of technical assistance that's being pursued due to things like needing to have a quality assurance project plan. But just for example, here's a budget of how a jurisdiction might start pulling together a technical assistance award um, and spending that over the next few years. So I don't want to go too deep into all of these. I do want to say that again with community engagement, there's a community engagement portion of our program, so we'll be coordinating the eligible uses a little bit and refining those a little bit further moving forward. And we've included sort of one catch-all for folks to develop a custom measure and propose that to us, that we'll be reviewing. So quickly, we are strongly encouraging jurisdictions, particularly the smaller DRCOG jurisdictions, to collaborate and partner for their uses, for their applications, and for how they want to use their potential awards. A couple of options include, identifying a lead jurisdiction um, to lead an application and then provide services to participating jurisdictions. And a second option we are exploring here is to allow jurisdictions to pool their funds to be used for contracted services that would be administered by DRCOG directly. Um, a few of the grant requirements that I wanted to make folks aware of in order to be eligible for the jurisdictional support grant. Um, there is a requirement for participation in the Building Policy Collaborative and a letter of commitment. That means sort of attending 75% of our peer network meetings moving forward. There are also going to be some monthly invoicing requirements, given that this is a reimbursement grant, as well as regular cadence of meetings and grant reporting with DRCOG. We will provide additional information with regards to what exactly that cadence will look like moving forward. But what I really wanted to preview with folks is that our goal is to get this money to local jurisdictions as soon as possible. And what we'd really like to do is to open the grant in July 1st so that we can have folks starting to draw down those funds as soon as September of this year. The initial idea right now is to basically open the grant on July 1st, have an expedited review period for the first two eligible uses of staff capacity and training, which are a little bit more cut and dry, and we can approve those a little bit ideally faster. Um, and then eventually ultimately close the grant after 2 months, so that we can do some coordination amongst our jurisdictions for other eligible uses that have been identified. So, not to say that you would have to get in by July 31st, if you wanted to do staff capacity, or if you wanted to do that in conjunction with another eligible use, but that if you were solely limiting yourself and your application to one of the first two uses, you would be, eligible to get that money, review done faster and get that money, start using that money faster. So I think I just hit time, um, and I wanted to make sure that I pause and I let anyone else from our jurisdictional work group chime in if there was anything they wanted to clarify or provide additional insight into before we open it up to uh, broader group discussion.
Thanks, Greg. Could I just highlight one quick thing? And thank you so much for all of this. That I was on the original grant application team, and there are many members of that team here today. And I wanted to emphasize that the fundamental purpose of the Building Policy Collaborative and this section of the DRCOG grant is to facilitate jurisdictions to reduce pollution through above minimum requirements. So that would be above state minimums, above what you're currently doing, but fundamentally above what's already required. And that's one reason that you may have noticed one of the ratios in there around calculating the allotments was based on the greenhouse gas emissions from the relative residential and commercial sectors. So the 15% to 10%, the 30% to 45%. So just bearing in mind that this is fundamentally a emissions reduction facilitation and support grant that we're super excited about.
Thanks, Colin. Anything else anyone from the working group wants to chime in with? All right. If not, then we have some time for reaction. I know I blew through that very quick. Sort of apologies for that. Happy to go back to the award structure to discuss that in further depth, but I want to open it up to participants to, chime in with thoughts or reactions. Really want to use this as an opportunity to gut check how the formula that we're proposing, feels for you all. Is it an amount? Are these amounts that are, functionally usable for you? And then are there any questions that you have with regards to um, either the eligible uses or the grant timeline that we've proposed moving forward?
Greg, I had a quick question. This is Katie from City of Lakewood. Good to meet you. I appreciate all this information. You had one slide about like working together in partnerships and then a potential for maybe working together as part of a bigger DRCOG contract where we could maybe leverage like economies of scale. Do you have an idea of what that could look like yet, or is it just an idea on the table?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that's probably the thing that we're still ideating on the most. I think that as we've been going through the eligible uses, what's been clear is that um, there's a pretty big distinction and line between sort of the staff capacity, um, you know, aspect of this program and for instance, like the technical assistance use. So the thought right now would be when we do close the grant to do a little bit of a matchmaking process to sort of make sure that we understand the full range of eligible uses that people are trying to apply for, and then see if there's any identify overlaps between our jurisdictions and some of those natural connections, whether they're subject matter or they're regional. There could be ways that people want to go place-based on their collaboration. We want to share, you know, inspector capacity, and you could think of having, one shared inspector or shared hours from inspectors to go out and do, inspections and enforcement. On the other hand, you could see that maybe there are some um, folks that are looking for shared support in policy development and adoption, and that would may necessitate that we would go after or create um, a narrower contract related to that. So we are in the process, and there will be some survey questions later on, trying to pre-identify what are some of those eligible uses folks are most interested in potentially collaborating on, both gauging your level of interest in collaboration and then, level of interest relative to different uses. Um, One thing I want to emphasize here is that you know, the the grant is designed so that you can apply for any of those eligible uses and create a budget up to your maximum award amount, consisting of multiple eligible uses. So you could do staff capacity and technical assistance, or, permitting systems and technical assistance. Um, so we do need to, we're in this process right now of trying to um, figure out where are the overlaps and where are the ways that we can, what are the things people are most interested in working together on. Thanks.
Greg, there's an item in the chat.
Okay.
Just a quick question.
Can you read that out? I don't have my
Sure.
chat open.
Maurice says, great presentation. Thank you. To confirm, DRCOG will calculate the score and final allocated funding for participating municipalities.
Yeah, so if you look at the if you got my earlier email, and I'll go back to let me try going back to that award slide. So what we have done, and we can send it out again after this meeting. Um, we have done a full allocation based on, a full scoring of all jurisdictions based on the criteria that, the formula that I previewed. So you can go into that document and find your jurisdiction and find what the score was and what the max award was. And you can see sort of where that score comes from based on your existing population and jobs and your future projected population and jobs. Um, that award amount is what we're calculating as the maximum you would be eligible for as part of the grant application process. Essentially, what we are um, suggesting to folks is that you can budget up to your maximum. You will have to identify a use in a budget for how you're planning on spending that money. But if you're in the $100,000 tier, you can budget up to $100,000 of eligible uses over the lifespan of this grant.
Great, thank you.
And Greg, that includes both funding rounds?
Uh, Sorry, I don't know why I can't see my chat. Maybe it's because I'm sharing my screen. Um, so the plan for the second round is we understand, in the ideal world, every single DRCOG jurisdiction will come in and ask for its maximum award amount. And that would help us get to our goal of greenhouse gas reductions in our region. We know that that's not necessarily going to happen. It's unlikely that that will happen. There are some jurisdictions that won't participate because they don't want to. There are some that won't participate, at least in this first round, because they don't have the capacity to right now. And or there may be some that decide potentially voluntarily not to uh, you know elect for their maximum award. So that's why we have the second round. What we'll be doing is running a competitive grant process. So once round one closes, we will basically tabulate how much we've obligated at the end of round one. What's the sum total of what everyone's applied for. We'll figure out what the difference is between that and the total award amount that we have. And then that's what the second round pool will be. And we'll run. So we don't know exactly how much is going to be left over, but once we do, we'll run a competitive grant process for that. And we're in the process of developing the scoring criteria for that, but there will be some scoring benefit for jurisdictions that missed out on round one that are coming in round two and want to join in with our regional efforts. All right, Adam, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. I noticed on a couple of the different eligible use slides, you had mentioned that there's overlap with energy office resources and potentially other DRCOG, other elements of the CPRG funding from DRCOG. And so I'm just wondering what the process would look like for DRCOG to be advising jurisdictions on where those overlaps are and, kind of how to thread that needle.
That's a great question, Adam, and uh, I appreciate it. We're still in that process right now internally in terms of defining essentially the audiences for the different grant awards. So just take, for example, the workforce development program. I think the intent there, within our broader grant is to come up with that neat line of like, here's what you know, um, the workforce development program is going to be running trainings on, who they're for, in particular, those trainings being for HVAC contractors and people in the workforce. There may be other ways that jurisdictions want to propose to use their funding. So whether those are for trainings, for industries that aren't going to be targeted by, the DRCOG workforce development program, or whether they can identify, um, you know, areas outside of that. So we're in the process of internally coordinating, and we'll be reaching out to the energy office to identify that as well. I think our plan is once you get to that, if we can't, we'll try to provide as much information as possible so that people don't apply for what would be an overlapping use upfront. But we'll also have a process at the end where, if your grant has identified something that, that maybe is overlapping, we can, have a conversation with you all about, what would be the best avenue to accessing, to addressing that need that's been identified, and how you can access that funding as well. Other thoughts or questions? I'm trying to scan, but I've got only so many windows I can have open at the same time.
Yeah, Greg, maybe this has been covered in the in the document. I'm just trying to clarify this though. Do you have to wait to actually start spending down this until you've received it? Or I'm looking at like kind of training and some certifications. There could be trainings that are coming up this summer that could be very good for inspectors or for code officials to attend now. But do we have to wait for DRCOG to formally award before anything is spent? Or can we invoice for something that happened, 30 days, 60 days, 120 days, 2025?
I'm going to
I'm gonna
punt to
go ahead.
Robert.
Yeah. I would guess, Jeff, that we have to be under contract before any eligible expenditures could occur.
Okay, thank you.
Let me stop sharing my screen as well, so you don't all have to stare at that.
Quick question about if we do round one funding, and let's say we still have to go through some budgeting process and actually, get the position listed. Let's say we're hiring someone. I'm just putting that out there. We wouldn't have to, is there a deadline from when we had to start spending the funding? Or is there any sort of penalty if we don't spend it right away?
Apologize, Mark. Can you say that again?
I'm sorry if I cut out. Uh, just given an idea of, so Jeff kind of brought up like how soon can we spend it? And I'm thinking I'm the opposite of that question, which is how long can I, after awarding, let's say I apply, right away when it opens in July, but I actually can't hire someone. Let's say I'm hiring someone until like, I don't know, January. Is there any sort of penalty for having done that early application and holding onto the funds, but not drawing them down?
No, I don't think so at this point. I think the intent is that we'll, as long as you are continuing to intend to use the funds for that purposes, for those purposes, once we make an award, we'll enter into a regular cadence of communication with the awarded jurisdictions. So we understand that there might be delays. You may make an offer and they don't accept. There may be things that just happen, and I don't. We haven't talked about or discussed any form of sort of clawback for unspent funds at this time. It is as a sort of reminder there, this is a reimbursement based jurisdiction. So clawback was probably the wrong term. Those are obligated funds, or we'll sort of earmarked those funds for jurisdictional expenses, but those aren't, the jurisdiction will need to be invoicing us on a monthly basis for those eligible expenses. So, I think come later years in the grant, if we are starting to realize that we have large amounts that are unspent, or jurisdictions haven't been able to fully utilize, we may consider what our options are at that point to incentivize innovative uses of those funds moving forward. Other gut reactions or things folks want to respond to? You love it, you hate it? Hi, Stephen.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Now, part of this program, in order to be awarded, should a city or a town or county have a decarbonization program in place so that what's the goal and purpose and our policy around decarbonization when it comes to the buildings and all that? Or is this grant will help facilitate that as well? Because I'm looking at this as it's a great program and all, but what can the funds be used for overall?
So just to clarify, so I think to the first point of your question, the only prerequisite here for, using these funds is that the expenditures are fit within one of the categories of eligible uses that we've identified, and that the city will sign a letter of intent to basically meet the goals that Colin was talking about of pursuing above state minimum, um, you know, carbon reduction policies. So where there's a letter of intent that we'll be developing and circulating to jurisdictions, it does not commit the jurisdiction to adopting any of these policies, but it is a commitment to working towards the adoption and implementation of the policies. And I think we really want folks that haven't we're really trying to accommodate jurisdictions that are far down the path of adopting policies, but also jurisdictions that are just beginning.
Okay.
And so we will be creating through our peer network, which is going to be basically that 70%, 5% of meetings that we were asking you to participate in is essentially a peer network a community of practice that will be facilitating for all of our jurisdictions to adopt, a roadmap of policies that will get us to our greenhouse gas reductions goals. But that's not going to necessarily obligate specific policy measures or timelines. We want to allow for some level of, customability for local jurisdictions as they move forward in that process. And what we'll then do is have some sub cohorts. So we'll probably identify groups that are moving at similar speeds or facing similar challenges, or want to focus on similar policies at the very beginning. So if you want to just focus on getting up to, you know, um, you know, new buildings and you're doing a lot of new buildings and you want to focus on your codes package, we'll have groups that are sort of um, focused on different areas of policy adoption and implementation.
Okay, thank you. And as far as awarding funds, I know Commerce City used to be a pass-through city. So our grants awards would go to the county and then they would administrate that. And now we're not a pass-through city because our population is above 50,000. So I don't know if that's something that could be grouped together for those smaller cities and work with their counties. But it seems like from the presentations, they're allowed to have autonomy and work on their own. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Stephen. And very excited for any local jurisdictions that want to pool their funds to, work with their counties to do so. If you take a look at the full list of awards, I think, we do have a lot of small jurisdictions in our region. And so roughly, I think 19 or so would be in that sort of $50,000 category. Obviously, and that's not an insignificant amount of money, particularly for some of the smaller jurisdictions. But logistically, it may be much easier for them to pool that money with together and have the county administer specific services on their behalf and utilize it in that kind of manner.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have a few more minutes before we're going to go to break, and then we'll come back and we'll go into small breakout groups. I think we want to allow you all some space to sit with the formula, react to the formula, kind of double check sort of where your jurisdiction falls in that. If you are having a really terrible time or you didn't get the email, shoot me a quick email. I'll monitor my email and during the break period, and I can follow up and make sure that I get that jurisdictional awards package to you all to be able to access. Any other questions? I see a couple of comments in the chat. Yeah. So one of the other, oh, I see Joel. Did you come off mute? No, sorry. You did not. That was, okay. Well, one thing I did want to preview, and I think to Jeff's point, is the that there's delays and how jurisdictions can utilize this funding. So we want you all to share out sort of what information we need to know to make sure that you can use the money as soon as possible. So just get you sort of thinking about that ahead of time. I know that there's a lot of different um, budgeting processes for the different local jurisdictions, different requirements in terms of how they do that based on the type of expenditure you're thinking of spending things on. So do let us know so that we can make this as usable for you as possible. Um, we want to get this information. We wanted to get some numbers to you right now so you can think about and start dreaming about how you want to spend it all. And we want to just make sure that we're doing this in a way that really is usable for you all.
I just wanted to talk about the process a little bit here and what we're marching towards. Just that your feedback today really help us as we present this to our technical committee, our oversight committee, and our board, right? All of whom have to kind of recommend and or adopt this policy for it to become official. So if you see a problem today, please voice that so that we can kind of incorporate that feedback before it makes it to those committees. Again, we're just trying to really vet this thing as much as we can so it's smooth sailing to the committees and becomes official policy here and we can get the money out the door.
And I'll just add a little bit here in that it took us a while to get to this point, but nothing's perfect. And so if there's any pieces or small, changes or things you can see that we're missing because we've been looking at it for too much, it would be really helpful to hear from you. Don't hesitate, even if it's a small change. It would be really helpful to hear that.
So, Christine, I see your hand up, and then you get the last word before we go to break.
Okay, thanks. Can you talk a little bit about the timeline and how it relates to getting the funding and passing some policies? Because what I'm wondering is if you get some funding to pass some policies, but those working groups to develop the policies haven't really gotten going or finished yet, so you don't know what those will look like, so you don't know if you'll want to adopt them or not. What's the order of things like that?
Sure. So, I think that the policies can come after you get your jurisdictional award. So there's no the point is that this should be these awards should be supporting jurisdictional support participation in the building policy collaborative, in the peer network, the policy network that is going to be piloting that and adopting the policy roadmap. And can support staff time to participate in that space, to start having the conversations with local decision makers around what the policy implications are and what policy implementation might look like, to start thinking through all of those. There's a lot of implementation that you need to lay the groundwork for, I think, for successful policy adoption and implementation and rollout. So I think we want to make sure that we're these grants, can go to supporting some of that preparatory work happening in local jurisdictions. All right. Colin, you have your hand up, and then I'm going to close us off and give everyone 5 minutes to stretch.
Yep, thanks, Greg. And to that question, Christine, this BPC is officially about implementation of policies that are developed and adopted. There is some flow between the development process, adoption, and then implementation. And that's another place where we're kind of flowing between DRCOG and CEO's offerings. So some of that is going to be a bit dynamic, but just want to let you know that's part of the consideration as well.
You're muted, Greg.
Sorry. Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Colin. With that, I'm going to pause us. Please don't go anywhere. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes, so 3 after, and then we'll get into some smaller breakout groups, and we've got some facilitators lined up to sort of walk us through, some of those questions with regards to the funding proposal, the eligible uses, and the logistics of actually, you know, submitting a grant application and getting to use it, and getting the money out the door. So we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes, and look forward to talking to you then. All right, welcome back, people. Welcome back. I'm going to encourage you all to turn on your cameras if you're willing, um, because we're going to be going into breakout soon, and it's always nicer to talk to faces than black boxes. Um, before we do that, maybe I can share my screen again real quick. But we are going to quickly talk about, sorry. Yeah, thoughts and reactions on the funding allocation, um, the eligible uses and, the timeline questions. So, you know, I'll share, here we go. Share that. Robert, if you could start breaking us up into groups, we're going to do roughly 7 groups. There'll be a facilitator assigned in each group that will be walking us through these questions. What we're going to do is try to really pace this along, kind of discussion around funding allocation, a conversation around eligible use, and then a funding, a discussion around the grant logistics and timeline. So once we go out, we'll give everyone roughly 15 minutes for conversation on each of those topics. We're then going to bring everyone back, swap you all up a little bit, let you get to talk to some of your other colleagues out there about a different topic. And then at the end of all of those discussions, we'll come back and have some time for a report out. We'll go into some survey that we've created for you all to provide some feedback, and then we'll talk about next steps. So, any questions with regards to the breakout sessions and what we're doing right now? All right, I'll stop my share. How are we doing, Robert, with the breakouts?
Well, I'm about to add you all to a room, except the moderators who will choose their own. So stand by. Hopefully you've gotten a pop-up to go to your rooms.
Hope so.
I'm just going to go down the list. Amanda, go to 1. Colin, go to 2. Mara, go to 3. Greg, go to 4. Paul, go to 5. Who am I missing?
E?
Hannah, you want to
6?
go 6?
Sure.
Yeah.
Lizzie, can you hear me?
I hope nobody was rudely interrupted mid-sentence. It probably happened.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're just going to be here for a minute while Robert gets our next breakouts ready to talk about eligible uses. In the meantime, there's one thing that came up that I wanted to sort of speak to for everyone, and then maybe we'll have time for any burning reactions or questions from anyone. I was reminded in our conversation in my group that I wanted to let everyone know that we are going to our financing and budget committee on Wednesday with our because we've selected our chosen vendor for the building policy collaborative, and which is Lotus Engineering, and we are really excited to have them on board and access all of their expertise and their experience working with the existing codes cohort. Also really excited because, the question came up, does everyone know how much money they're getting? Well, the first thing that's in that contract with them is to start one-on-one conversations and get in contact with every single jurisdiction to say, here's how much money you're eligible for. So, could always use your help in spreading the word and sharing this the information we shared with you to your peers, but we'll also, that's sort of the number one thing for us, is to make sure everyone knows that there's money here for them if they want to do one of the things that, and there's a lot of things we're letting you do. There's money here for you all. So I just wanted to mention that. Any other burning reactions or questions with regards to the funding allocation that people want to share out right now? All right, seeing none, let's move on and talk about some of those eligible uses a little bit more. So, Robert, you want to pop us out?
We should be going.
Great.
And host, you want to just go back to the same number you went to last time? Should be new people.
Perfect.
Did we leave or are we still here?
Oh, how funny. I thought I left,
In the
but
first
I
people.
thought I did too. Oh, that says leave meeting if I do that.
oh, well, I'm sure Robert's on it.
Yeah, he's stuck in our group, right? All I know is when I went to that little door person and
Oh,
I clicked
yeah.
before, it said go to main or leave meeting. Now I'm afraid to click leave meeting because I think it'll dump me out.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We have one more breakout for you all before we come back and wrap up. So Robert, if you could get working on getting us in our next group. I think we've got time maybe for any burning questions that came up with regards to eligible uses and issues around that. I see Teresa.
Hey, in our group, we asked if BPS programming and policy work would qualify, and so we're just looking for clarification.
Yeah, go ahead, Colin.
Cool.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, as I was saying, I think that the goal is to try to make the grant application for as easy as possible for you all, but we will be asking for like a very short narrative of like if you're hiring for a specific position or to do a specific thing, you'll have to make the case of, at least make the connection for us about what your expenditure is relative to the goals of the grant. The goals of the grant are pretty broad, right? So.
Thank you.
One quick question that we had on our side is, as far as staff, if not just staff salary and, fringe and benefits, but other things you might need, like maybe it's an inspector and you would need a vehicle or something along those lines, or office supplies, if that would count as well. And I wasn't entirely certain the answer to that.
I don't know that we know the answer to that. Robert, do you have an answer?
I mean, again, it depends. Like, yeah, indirect expenses are definitely eligible. I think beyond that, whatever they need. So often that includes what they need to be done there for their job. If
Mhm.
it goes above and beyond normal indirect costs, I think it's perfectly reasonable to include that.
Yeah. No new fleets though.
Yeah.
We want 75 new vehicles.
All right, any
All
other
right.
burning questions on the eligible uses? All right, let's get into our last conversation. Thank you all so much for being on camera. Oh, Martin, real
Greg,
quick.
just for continuity purposes, would it be possible for us to go into the group that we were in previously? Or, so we don't have to spend time reintroducing ourselves and kind of reestablishing camaraderie and just continue with our conversation?
I appreciate the comment, Martin. Unfortunately, that's not how
It's
we've
possible.
designed. Do you want to do it, Robert?
I don't know if does anybody prefer one way or the other?
It was nice to be in a different group, be to kind of, get different perspectives. That helps.
Let's stick with that then. We'll keep on mixing
True,
it up.
too.
But appreciate that, Martin.
All right, I appreciate that, Martin. All
Here
right,
we go.
well, thank you all, and we'll reconvene soon.
Same deal. Everybody know where they're going? Thanks for sticking with us, everybody.
We've dwindled in numbers.
I
Have
hope
we,
they're
or are
still
we
coming.
missing some breakouts?
Yeah, we got some stragglers.
They have good conversations. I have to say it's kind of nice, like, to have different people, because it's just nice to hear different perspectives. Although I do like having, you know, some continuity, but I feel like I don't ever get a chance, especially for in person. I never want to leave the person physically and go to somewhere at their table. So it's kind of nice sometimes.
Have to be forced.
Right? I
All
do that.
right. Welcome back, everyone. I apologize for I'm in the office and I feel like I'm just like this dark and brooding presence online right now. But I blame our office lighting. I'm generally much, nicer interior looking, I think. Um, so thanks. We've got some time now for large group discussion, and really wanted to open it up to anyone to talk about any of the three sort of main topics that we talked about. Maybe I'll start us off just if there's any further discussion that the large group wants to have now that we've all had a little bit more time to sort of sit with the funding formula and allocation and anything anyone wants to chat about or share with regards to that. And if not, you'll make me call on my facilitators and they'll be sad.
I'll just bring up something that I thought was really interesting from the last little bit of our conversation, was talking about just budget. And I know for North Glen and also for Thornton and Broomfield, who we were talking with, we already have our budget submitted for next year, and it's going through our reviews. So we would probably have to do some sort of budget amendment. But looking at how you actually allocate it and making sure you're taking it across the full 4 years. So when we were talking with Alex, like, if $1.2 million is a really scary amount to have to float in your budget, because I know for Northcombe we have to fully budget everything ahead of time as though it's not going to be grant funded. But if you look at it per year, it might be a little easier to talk about. So just thinking of it in terms of what year you're allocating for. And then Martin had asked whether you could add additional funding to that program or that position, and saying, all right, we're building, we only have $300,000 funded through DRCOG, but we actually want to, expand it out to be larger. You could do that, or even extend the position past the 4 years. I think all those are really interesting and just kind of fun options. So I wanted to put it out there for everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Mara. And I think also just worth reminding folks that there is going to be a second round, that second round competitive grant process. And, if you dream big and you wanna go for more, we can't guarantee that funding, but it's worth keeping in mind that if there's the potential for future awards to your jurisdiction to build on some of the work that you're already going to be pursuing in the with your round one funding.
Greg, do you know, I mean, I know it's a bit early for this, but can groups of jurisdictions apply for round two funding competitively?
Mm-hmm.
And
I
if
would.
so,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would the funding then be divided among them, or can they collectively be the recipient of funds and just have a centralized reporting structure?
Well, I'll say from my perspective, I'm down with anything that reduces my administrative overhead.
Okay.
So if you all wanna get together and go in on some collaborative, uh, agreements, then please, I will say
Okay.
actually please do that. But yeah, I think for round two, a collective application or collaborative application, we would definitely entertain. I haven't decided yet whether or not that would be sort of a bonus scoring criteria or not, like whether we're trying to incentivize it as part of the grant. But would definitely entertain that and encourage it. Especially if that's going to help, either accelerate the timeline for implementation or use of those funds. Paul.
Thank you.
One of the questions that came up in the last round was related to the Lotus contract and whether or not Lotus can help communities, especially smaller communities, develop the grant application.
That is a good question. I don't know. I'll be honest, I haven't revisited the, we're going to be doing some scope amendments, and I haven't revisited the proposal in a hot minute. So we can follow up on that and get back to you. The goal, certainly it's been envisioned that for future grant opportunities that, as part of their contract as a facilitator, they will be providing um, additional services, jurisdiction specific services and technical assistance. And, should there be other grant opportunities or other opportunities, I think we don't want to overly control what the scope of services that Lotus is engaging with all of the local jurisdictions on. And I could imagine, at least for round two, if you're capacity constrained and you need help pulling together the application, um, working with the facilitator to do that could be one of the ways that you would use sort of some of the funds that are built into that contract with Lotus to support your jurisdiction. So every jurisdiction will get, some amount of hours of, support from Lotus, and we're still in the process of figuring out exactly what that looks like, but I would imagine that would work. Any other thoughts or questions with regards to or comments on the funding formula? I mean, I'm glad everyone seems to be so favorable.
I just have one. Oh, Greg, I just have one
No,
quick thing.
go ahead.
All the groups I was in, we were very excited about the amounts in the funding allocations. I think our biggest one thing we would all love, I think, would be crowdsourcing of what everyone else is doing for innovative ideas and how we could potentially make the money go the furthest. So, yeah, just if everyone wants to share their ideas somehow, or if there's some way to set up that process, that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah, I'll say that happened. That was a conversation we had in ours as well. It's just kind of, how much can we just not reinvent wheels and collaborate?
Colin, I see your hand.
Same in our groups. Yeah, sharing ahead the concept, seeing how DRCOG can facilitate the collective, what collective options would look like, what like a vendor option would look like kind of as soon as possible. That to the question about whether there's an express path for really straightforward use, just if that were an option, really defining that carefully, and being clear as to what it is. But yeah, same in our groups as well.
Great. Well, I'm glad everyone's so interested in leveraging resources and being collaborative. That's the name of the game here at DRCOG. So we'll happily explore that with you all. And yeah, I think to that extent, it did come up that we'll try to make sure that we have some blueprints, some basically ready to submit applications for you all relative to some specified uses, particularly those that might get a accelerated track for review, and then afford ourselves some of that time to collate and figure out what is everyone interested in. We can do this in parallel too. So there's a survey that's coming out at the end of this meeting, where if you can start identifying some of the top ways that you want to use this, we can report that back out to all and start that process ahead of the applications going out, in terms of sort of where are some of the areas that jurisdictions are looking to kind of work together or pool resources to address. So really appreciate that. Well, moving us on to sort of the eligible uses, anything there that people want to chime in on or raise for the whole group? We did get in my groups the question around sort of, can you go in for multiple eligible uses? The answer is yes. your budget will be sort of for your total award amount for the 4 years, and you can identify as many eligible uses as you can reasonably budget for within that, knowing that, you know, if you do go for multiple eligible uses, it probably put you into that second track of review for us, so that, you know, it may delay, you know, by a month or two our ability to finalize the contract. But, you know, dream big, you know, spend all your money. You know, you may not be awarded an amount that, you know, gets you to, either you may budget for a full FTE but still have money left over, or you may not be able to get there. So, you know, please do look at all those eligible uses and identify how much you want to budget for each year over the lifespan of the award period. The other thing to say is, uh, it did come up, is there a cap on any of the expenditures? We haven't at this point put in a hard cap on any of the eligible uses, but I will emphasize that the point is for all of your uses to support, you know, adoption and implementation and enforcement of, you know, some of our building policies to really, you know, get to a point where our policy landscape is, you know, pushing us as a region towards our greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so, you know, we'll probably not look very favorably upon like a $2 million application for a bespoke, you know, permitting system. Like that's probably not going to pass muster. So we'll figure out, we'll still determine the right mechanism and the guidance materials for you all, so that you can know how we'll be reviewing and those types of proposals. But the goal is to make sure that, you know, you have some flexibility while without going and, you know, misdirecting the you know, the funds as intended. Colin.
Colin.
The quickest thing around permitting, a great savvy member of one of our groups pointed out that a lot of permitting support software systems and systems are not just for energy. So there may need to be some clarification around eligibility, that it's you're only covering a part commensurate with the energy and emissions contribution of said eligible measure.
Yeah. And that came up too, also with regards to even staff capacity. You know, if there's, you know, if staff are going to have multiple functions or whatnot, you know, there may be some limitations, or, you know, we'll try to figure out the right guidance for you all in terms of, you know, how you would budget for or sort of apply for a position that might be split time or things of that nature. Mara and then Martin.
I might even say something that Martin would say, because it's an idea you brought up, but something that came up with eligible uses is this idea of, so maybe you have a staff member and maybe you have some extra funds available, but the whole idea of this is, if you're getting staff, you're building these systems that are really maybe long-term, looking past that, you know, October 2029 number and saying, all right, when the staff goes away, it's not just a poof, well, this whole thing goes away and we no longer care about building policy and we no longer care about greenhouse gas emissions, but kind of setting up systems. So is it that we have to update your comprehensive plan and then sustainability plan and then work our way into having these be long-standing systems, and your permitting, you know, your code is all supported by not just staff and council, but about your legal guidance. So just looking at maybe supplementing some of the way you set up your funding and saying, yeah, this staff person is intended to allow us to get to these other goals, not just only building policy, because it might not last very long. So anyway, just thought it was really interesting.
Great. All right, then Martin, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Mara. Very, very, very important concept there. The question I had is a little bit different, and that is whether urban heat island mitigation measures would be eligible as well. Didn't mean to stump you.
I don't think we've talked about that. Colin, did we have? Yeah, go ahead.
Haven't specifically talked about it that I remember. I think that's more of an adaptation than a mitigation, and this is definitely a climate change and emissions mitigation grant. I guess if it were, I welcome others' input, but I guess if it were part of a package, but my initial thought is to make sure to distinguish where we are on adaptation versus mitigation of emissions.
I
Yeah.
initially go towards, oh, go ahead, Paul. You might have a little.
I was gonna ask a clarifying question. Do you mean like urban heat island elements in code? So using code as, because that could fall into energy efficiency
Right.
stuff in a way, multiple
And I think
co-benefits.
there's even current proposals in our existing code cohort of mandating certain commercial albedo requirements for the rooftops. So making sure it's a, you know, a white roof or something along those lines, which would, you know, aim at that urban heat island impact. But I think it's part of a larger code package that includes it, but it's not, its main goal is still the GHG reduction versus the albedo being the main goal. If that makes any sense.
It's a strong question, Martin, and I think one we'll have to talk about. But I think guiding principles that came through that should help you all think about how you would make an application are, you know, is the purpose of your expenditure driving towards greenhouse gas reductions? Is it policy related? Like those are the probably two primary driving considerations for all of this. And so the staff will be working towards policy implementation, right? Like these are the connections that we'll be, you know, asking you to make in a non-exhaustive short form narrative to try to make it easy. But those are the guiding principles. And so if you can make a strong case for it, or if there's co-benefits, I could see there being a way for us to do that. And or, you know, I think that there may be a in round two also scoring criteria for innovation and or like co-benefits of like different policies or policy pursuits that you want to apply for. So I could see that being another way for us to accommodate that while we're still trying to define exactly all of round one. All right, we're nearing time. I want to open the floor for any final questions before I actually am going to ask Maddie to share her screen for a quick Menti survey. And I'm going to do that because I'm a total Menti noob and have not been able to figure it out. So any final questions before you hop on your phones and or computers and get completely distracted?
Can people see the Menti? Hopefully, I can't really see my screen, so, okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can also
I'm
send,
clicking all the up.
okay, yes, I can see that now. I can also put the link in the chat just in case for anyone else. Greg, I don't know if you want us to go as a group one by one, or if you just want to let everyone answer the Menti. We can also do it that way too.
Let's go as a group and yeah, I'll be honest. I'll defer to the wisdom of the group in terms of what's best. How did you all do it last time, Maddie?
I wasn't here for the last workshop.
Oh.
I'll defer to you.
We went to what you're doing now, the question by question. It's kind of nice sometimes to see what everyone's thinking together. So,
and just, I know everyone's probably tired. It's getting late in the day. There's only like 5 questions, so we'll probably still end on time. But yeah.
All right. Well, you can keep chiming in if you want to drag that bar one way or another, but it looks like so far, I'm very happy to hear that you all trust us so much. And yeah, it looks like we're feeling pretty comfortable on the the funding formula. I will say, and just preview for you again, we do have about 2 weeks. We want you to share the guidance document with your peers and colleagues and decision makers. And there's an opportunity for you all to send written comment back to me, on this, in case there's any other considerations people want to, throw out there in a more private manner as well. All right, you want to move us on to the next question, Maddie? All right, so the next question, what eligible uses are you most interested in? We'll give everyone about a minute to two to answer this.
I'm sorry, there is one typo. I see that. Feel free to ignore.
Yeah, you can really pan statement 5. I don't know.
That'll be the other option.
Yeah, that was statement 5 custom?
I think
Yeah.
statement 5 was custom, yeah. All right, great. So what I will say here is that as this is continuing to get some feedback, I think what we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but we'll go through the process of trying to provide a little more clarity on what the potential technical assistant like options are. It was raised in some earlier groups, like if we could sort of preview, like here's the top 5 sub-eligible uses of like ways that you would use that money, that would be helpful, and we'll try to provide a little more guidance there, and also get your feedback then on which of those types of uses you would be interested in. It's definitely coming across that there's interest in this, but that's probably also one of the places where we could leverage some pooled resources the most. And so we'll follow up with you all with a little more guidance on that, and sort of iterate on what the technical assistance options might look like, and try to continue that conversation. Great. Any other questions or thoughts anyone wants to chime in on this one? Then let's move on, Maddie.
And to clarify, the procurement option is DRCOG gets a ton of people who are really interested in X, and then they procure those services for everyone interested.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I apologize, I'm not a great survey writer, so my qualitative design is could use some help probably. So it looks like there's, based on some initial results, a decent level of interest, and what we'll say interest and not necessarily commitment. So again, I think this speaks to what I was just saying with regards to the technical assistance options, because at least, for me, that seems like where a lot of, a group procurement, a service, contract might make the most sense. We'll follow up with you all, to try to, as we provide those, identify those potential areas of group procurement. If you have any suggestions also on like, hey, this would be a great contract for DRCOG to set up, do feel free to just, send me that, those suggestions as well. We're always looking to hear back from you all. All right, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to just hop off mute real quick?
Yeah, I don't want to wait. I think that's one of the most important things that I'd like to see is, make sure that DRCOG has retained some money to really assist in technical assistant and potential various types of procurement that makes sense. And
Mm.
so I don't, but that's something else we can talk about later, but that's something I feel strongly about.
Hmm.
And that could be in the form of us being able to utilize a consultant that you've selected as a preferred vendor or something and still be eligible to make sure that's eligible to receive funds that even based on your selection of that consultant.
Mm. Okay, that's a good idea. All right, we can think about and iterate on whether there's sort of a placeholder option for, you know, direction of your sort of pre-allocated funds towards a contract that would be administered by DRCOG. All right, and it's great to hear. Everyone wants to be collaborative. Well, it's a really great group of folks then. Not that you're not great if you don't want to collaborate. Um, so okay, I think what this is really telling me is we need to do a little bit more back and forth with you all. Um, and try to keep the lines of communication open as we give feedback to you all on sort of what people are identifying as their top eligible uses and where there might be opportunities for alignment, and maybe create some space for you all to even just workshop and connect with each other on like actual collaborative applications. So if you want us to play matchmaker, let us know, but we'll definitely look to continue that. All right. And last, I think this is the last question, right, Maddie?
Just one more, so we're almost there.
Okay. All right. Let's do it real quick. I want to let everyone go because you've all been stuck with me for so long. Okay. See, the bars seems to have mostly stopped moving. So I want to, oh, all right. Final 10 seconds to put your comment in. I think what we'll do is we'll create, based on this, some surveys that we can send out to the group with more definition about what that looks like, so that we can start looking kind of behind the scenes and start doing some of that, helping you get in touch with each other on those collaboration spaces. Yeah, and the last question is an overall readiness one. So we got 22 participants. Not everyone's going to vote, but got a few more numbers to go. Okay. Well, for that, I'm very happy to hear that it seems like the timeline's probably going to work for most of you. For those of you that don't feel like it's very well aligned, please do reach out to me. And if you have any specific concerns about your ability to, utilize this, we want to make sure that, we're trying to enroll everyone as who wants to in round one. But do know that if it's not something that we can fully accommodate in this round, we are likely to sort of preserve your pre-allocation or your allotment for round two, if that would be a better timeline for you all. All right, Maddie, if you want to stop sharing, I'm going to share real quick. So just wanted to wrap us all up. Just say thank you all so much for your participation. I really valued this opportunity to get to meet some of you a little more face to face, at least in those those breakouts. There's no survey. We just did the survey, so apologies for that. But we will follow up with an additional survey to sort of build out a little bit of those this collaboration spaces and sort of eligible use options. Timeline on that TBD. I do want to preview for you that we have. It would be great if you have any written feedback that you want to send my way, or that you want to share the guidance document with your colleagues and have them provide feedback. Please do feel free to send that my way, and we're hoping ideally to get that back by March 28th. Just so that when I bring this to, we will be bringing this to our April 1st technical committee meeting and our April 11th oversight committee discussion. Apologies for the typo there. Those are our public meetings, and we will be going through the whole proposal with them there, but it'd be great to get your feedback beforehand so I can incorporate it and iterate on it by then. That's all with the goal of getting this through committee approvals in May, getting it through our full DRCOG board approval in June, and that would get us on pace to then open up our grant application in July. So with that, I will stop my share. And Art, you have a final floor.
Yeah, a lot of times on CDOT projects, we get reimbursed monthly. Do we intend to be able to reimburse? Someone brought up earlier, like budgeting the whole amount of money, but in reality, you could just budget an amount and knowing that we're going to be able to get reimbursed monthly and design contracts around that. So you don't have to have like the full 1.5 million for DRCOG in your budget for 4 years. You can kind of submit invoices and plan to be reimbursed on a monthly basis. I don't know. Is that probably true?
Yeah, I think what we're looking for is essentially a budget proposal of how you intend to spend the money down in the next 4 years, but you don't need to, we won't be holding you strictly to that. We'll have ongoing conversations with all the with all the jurisdictions, as we go through that process. So it'll be monthly reimbursements, but whether or not your monthly reimbursement is explicitly line itemed out or not, for staff, that's probably possible. For some of these other expenditures, we understand that the timeline may shift as long as the total budget amount doesn't.
Art, to be really clear, I think it depends on your city and what their requirements are. Like North Glen, we have specific rules around what we have to do to accept monies. But if you can just contract out to be monthly reimbursed, that would be super, super easy and nice. But either way.
Cool. All right, well, no more hands up. We're past time. Thank you all again so much for joining. We really value your feedback. Hope you see it reflected in the program design, and we'll be in touch with more information soon. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.